The Middle Ages simply are an eye-opener for modern men with many peculiar things, starting from a rather strange way of life and attitude to the outside world and ending even with the wedding ceremony. And often in each country the rules for concluding a marriage union, and even more so the traditions of the wedding night, differ dramatically. Although, of course, to a modern person they may seem strange and disgusting and somewhere even outright creepy. In this episode, we will tell you about wedding night in Middle Ages. Welcome to Flip Side of History, and let's continue. Women's surprises. Most of all in the history of citations remained about Viking women, who simply loved to arrange a variety of surprises for their loyal new husbands on their wedding night. And often they, in this context surprises, were not only not harmless, but also life-threatening. In the extant Song of the Nibelungen tells how the young queen Brunhilde, during the wedding ceremony, was very offended by her newly made husband, King Gunther. During the feast, he plainly disregarded the question of his beloved wife. As a result, together with the wedding night, passionate hugs, and so on, the husband experienced the discontentment of Brunhilde, who, in addition to her charming appearance, as it turned out, had an excellent command of martial arts. As an outturn, Gunther hung on the wall until the morning, where his young wife put him. And this man was released just early in the morning. So as not to disgrace her husband in front of the advisors and other noble people, the girl dragged him into the chambers. True, she did not offer herself as a prize, intending to repeat the punishment the next night. Fortunately, Gunther was smart enough to make adjustments for the conflict, and before the second wedding night, invite his old friend Siegfried to the chambers. And then, obviously, you never know, the furious wife will again leave him to spend the night on the wall up in the air. King Helgi of Scandinavia experienced almost the same thing. He looked after the most beautiful bride in northern lands, Queen Saxlanda Olif. True, the girl herself was least of all going to chain herself by marriage, but the groom turned out to be very assertive. He landed in Saxland with his huge army, putting the queen in front of a difficult choice. Either she marries him or a bloody war will begin. Naturally, the clever ruler chose the first option, but not everything was so easy for the winner, however. And frankly, nothing at all. Having drunk during the wedding to a state of complete insanity, Helgi reached the marriage bed, as he is now speaking, very drunk. So he was not able to, fulfill any of marital duties. Of course, if the newly made husband was capable of business, Olif, theoretically, could change her mind. And so the young wife added an injection of a sleepy thorn to her snoring husband, shaved off all the hair on his head, and smeared poor man with tar. The girl put all the clothes of the ill-fated husband together with him in a bag, sent them to the ship standing at the pier, and then woke up the king's servants, ordering them to go after their master. And while the stunned servants brought their Helgi to a relatively normal state, Olif managed to raise all her troops, bring them to full combat readiness. And the hapless husband realized that his plan had failed miserably. No beautiful wife and no fame. And King Helgi saw that now there was no way to attack her, that the best thing to do is to get out as quickly as possible. The fierce Vikings, of course, could not help but perpetuate this very curious episode, and this literary monument, the saga of Hrolfskjerdinga, has survived to this very day. By the way, one of the reasons why in many countries grooms were forbidden to drink during the wedding, and sometimes even to approach the wedding table, was precisely the concern for the safety of the spouse on the wedding night. After all, worse than the disappointed and deceived woman in expectations can only be, nothing is worse than that actually, European marriage traditions. Without a doubt, it is necessary to take into account and understand that in those days the duration of life of an ordinary person was quite small, so marriages were concluded almost constantly at a very young age. And there was nothing surprising in the fact that young people simply did not even know what to do next with a new spouse. Therefore, witnesses or parents of young people were often present near the marriage bed. Sometimes they were behind a kind of screen, to prompt advice and generally help. We've got to add that to purely practical help, witnesses were also needed for another thing, to prove that the intimacy had taken place in the real sense. The fact is that according to medieval laws, if there was no direct act itself, the marriage could be declared invalid, and there were a lot of such cases in history. Only after everything took place, the marriage was recognized by both the church and the law as valid, and there was no turning back for the young newlyweds. In medieval England, among a variety of other things, Before the wedding night, the bride was scrupulously examined by the groom's relatives to make sure that the bride with serious flaws was not slipped into the marriage bid. After the inspection, the door was closed and everyone crowded around the door, waiting for the girl's first cry, and you already guessed why. Only after that, the relatives returned to the table and calmly celebrated further. The marriage took place, thus the family can be calm. In France, young people were offered to drink wine before entering the bedchamber for courage. And as one would expect, almost everywhere in the morning, a blanket sheet with corresponding traces was posed for everyone to take a look. This was done both as a confirmation of the innocence of the bride and, again, as a confirmation that the marriage can be considered accomplished and held, since the young have already got to know each other well. Majestic Ceremonies. For the monarchs, both the wedding itself and the wedding night differed slightly, for the most part in terms of the wealth and number of dignitary witnesses. Sometimes even before the wedding night, the spouse lay on the bed, surrounded by witnesses, having performed the so-called act of laying together. After that act, with almost 100% probability, the topic of marriage was raised. Almost because, as already mentioned, without direct close contact, even such a marriage could be dissolved even right the next day. After the impressive ceremonies, the young were released from their outfits. At first, the women served the bride on the bed, and then the drunken groom almost always appeared in the company of the same drunken friends. And then up to 20 people could stay in the room, including the archbishop or bishop, the most important dignitaries and relatives. All of them had to testify to the fact of being close. The rite of the first night. One of the most savage and strangest traditions of the Middle Ages is the so-called rite of the first night of the feudal lord. When a wedding took place on his estates, the landowner could demand that the bride be brought to his own chambers to assess how attractive and overall good she was. Of course, this did not bring joy to anyone, and often it was the dishonored bride who became the means for popular unrest, ending in a lot of shed blood. Many academics believe that in reality such a ceremony was intended to legally take an additional tax from subjects without causing indignation. It is known that many feudal lords were least interested in newly made brides and offered the groom to simply pay off. The amount of the buyback could vary, but it was she, the woman, who smoothed out the tension. If the groom did not have enough money to protect the honor of his own bride, then this is his own problem. A document has survived to this day in which one of the Norman feudal lords, La Rivière-Boudet, in the year 1419, produced his own analog of the law which clearly spelled out the cost of the service not to touch the bride. In this specific case, I also have the right to charge my people and others, when they marry in my possession, 10 sous of Tours, and a sirloin of a pig along the whole ridge and up to the ear, as well as a gallon of any drink added to these provisions. Or I am able, and must, if I think it's good, lie down with the bride in that case, when her husband or his messenger does not give me or my commissioner one of the above-mentioned things. As was anticipated, if the groom did not have such an opportunity, then he could rely on only one thing, that the bride was simply to distaste to the overlord, or he was simply not around during the wedding. Thank you for watching our episode. Leave a like and subscribe to Flip Side of History.